Well, we will go on and get started tonight, and we'll probably have some sort of trickling in tonight, but it's good to have everyone that's gathered here tonight in person, and also those that are watching on YouTube or will watch on YouTube after the fact. If you haven't gotten your papers, does anybody need a paper tonight that does not have one? The front side is sort of our notes for tonight. The speaker, which is the same speaker we had 2 weeks ago. He is not the speaker that we'll have in 2 other weeks when we watch the video, but he is the speaker again tonight. So he'll go through, and you can just sort of make notes from his slides, things that you think are relevant, things that maybe you did not know. He sort of gets it. I put it in sort of a chronological order, starting with Adam and Eve. He will kind of hit Adam and Eve at the end. So, when he starts talking about Cain and Abel, don't get bent out of shape. At the end, he'll talk a little bit about Adam and Eve. So you can sort of write in some notes at that time. If you remember, last week we looked at Genesis 1:26 through 28, the fact that mankind was made in the image of God. The Bible tells us that man was made in the image of God. It doesn't speak about any other animals or anything else being made into the image of God. The fact that we are made into the image of God means that we are unique. And the fact that we are created in the image of God speaks against the idea of evolution. Man is not merely a highly evolved animal, but a unique creation of God, and certainly that gives us value. One of the biggest moral problems with evolution is the idea that we are nothing but just animals. Abortion does not matter. Slavery, genocide, these things don't matter because, after all, we're just animals, right? Survival of the fittest, that sort of mentality there. Not that evolution is the source of our problem. What is the source of our problem? Sin. That's right. But evolution has been used to sort of downplay the value of human life. All men and women are created in God's image. All are descendants of one ancestor. And who is that ancestor? Adam, right? Because even Eve is a descendant of Adam, right? These things, the fact that we are created in the image of God, unifies us as humanity. We are one race, and that is the biological race. Tonight, we're going to be looking at another characteristic that sort of unifies mankind, and that is our sinful nature. You think about Adam and Eve. What did Adam and Eve do in the garden? Well, they rebelled against God, right? They rebelled against God. They made themselves the authority of truth, right? What is right and what is wrong. As a result of Adam and Eve's sin, the consequences of sin were what? What were the consequences of Adam and Eve's sin? Okay, that was what they did. They ate of the fruit God told them not to, right? They rebelled against God. Well, their eyes were opened, right? They were cast out of the garden. They were separated from God, alienated from God. They began to die. The whole world was affected by sin. Now they were going to die. Sometimes you're like me. You wake up in the morning and your body hurts a little bit more than it did the day before. What do you blame that on? Blame it on Adam and Eve, right? No, we blame it on sin. Ultimately, I know it's old age, but it's sin and the effects of sin on the whole world around us. So as we kind of look at the video tonight, he's going to talk about each of these accounts, and he's going to identify man's sin. He's going to talk about God's judgment, but then he's also going to talk about God's mercy. So like I said, we got this video tonight. It's about 20 minutes long. We're going to come together and sort of discuss some of the things real briefly. You have your sheets tonight for notes. On the back of that, you have some verses and some questions there. If you do a little bit of that homework, it will help with the discussion that we're going to have next week. And that's still kind of the ongoing format for our studies. So we'll turn it over to the guy on our video at this time.
We look at the first sin cycle and how sin is so pervasive. And we see that the damage in the relationship with God and with each other. And we will continue seeing this cycle again. And let's look at the story of Cain and Abel very quickly. Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 and 8. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again, she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought to the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. They both brought offerings to God, but we can see that Cain's unwillingness to honor God properly in their offerings, while Abel acted more honorably. We don't know exactly the details, but we can see that Cain didn't want to honor God properly. And he got mad. He got upset and killed his own brother and tried to cover up the sin. And we see this cycle again of sinfulness. And one important thing that we will see at the end, Adam and Eve become our first parents. The unity of humanity, it speaks of how all humanity come from Adam and Eve. And we will be looking at some passages to support that claim. And we see how sin continues to be transmitted. And we get to the flood story. We're going to read that important passage in Genesis 6. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. Sin continued to flourish and extend. And now people continuously thinking evil. Evil nature of humanity continued to expand. And in this context, God is going to act. God decided to start over using a flood to judge all who did not listen to him, all who rebelled against his will. God could not stand that his creation had gone so bad. So he chose Noah to build the ark where Noah and family could be saved. Again, wickedness need to be punished. But a recurring theme that we will look at the end is God's graciousness. God found favor in Noah. And he's going to choose to save humanity through Noah and his family. God starts over with Noah and his family. And this takes us to the story of the Tower of Babel. Genesis 11:1-9. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore his name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. One important thing to remember is that they had been told to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth. Once again, we see that they sought to control their own destiny and become great. This sin cycle continues to show up. They don't want to live for God's glory. They want to live for themselves. It's not anymore God that would make you, who would make you great. They want to make a name for themselves. And we see that they're going to be sparse. They're going to be spread all over the face of the earth. Here we speak English. In Peru, we speak Spanish, Espanol. And we see how our languages came from that dispersion. So far, we've seen that this creation, this amazing God who created everything good. But then we saw how humanity rebelled against this holy God. And one important point that I want to mention is for us to see this gracious God. This gracious God is a seeking God. When we read the stories, remember how after Adam and Eve sinned and they hid themselves, who is seeking after them? God. God is seeking after them. In the story of Noah, when evil was continually in the minds of people, it's God who chooses Noah to begin again. This is a gracious God who is a seeking God. We see that this God is a gracious God that is going to clothe Adam and Eve. They chose to clothe themselves with leaves. God is going to clothe Adam and Eve the way they were supposed to be clothed. We need God in our life. And we need to remember this promise. This promise in Genesis 3:15 has been called, for those who like to study the Bible, the proto-promise. evangelion, the proto-gospel, the announcement of God's promise that he wasn't gonna leave humanity in their sinfulness. In Genesis 3:15, God says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Satan's offsprings against Eve's offsprings. Eve's offsprings was going to get hurt, but Satan was going to be destroyed. And from Genesis 3:15, with a promise, we can imagine people wondering, who is this son of Eve who would crush the serpent's head? Who is this son of Eve that would come to rescue us from sin? Was it Cain? Nah. Abel? He was killed. We continue to ask the question. And then when we see Shem and then Abraham, was it Abraham? Was it Moses? Was it David? Could be. No. Solomon? No. And we continue in the story, and when we look in Luke and Matthew and the count of generations, there's the son of Eve, Jesus Christ, who will be able to terminate, destroy Satan forever and rescue us. This is a gracious God. So, where's the unity of humanity? We haven't talked much about that yet. I like what Hammett writes about the unity of creation, the unity of humanity. The unity of humanity is the teaching that all humanity derives from the original created couple. This is seen in Paul's statement that God made all nations from one man. I want to read a passage in Acts 17. It's a foundational passage. Listen to what it says. Acts 17, verse 26. And he, speaking of God, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should see God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. He made from one man every nation of mankind. Or as other translations say, God made all nations from one blood. That's how another translation says that. What does that mean? That we are all related. If people could understand that there's only one race, humanity, and that different skin color is not what gives us our worth. Our worth comes from the fact that we were created by God, that we were made by him. And Hammett continues saying in Genesis 3:20, for the name of Eve given to her by Adam, because she would become the mother of all the living. Hammett continues saying this is confirmed by biblical teaching that we all share a common human nature. This is repeated, taught in Romans 5:12. And listen to what it says. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. We all share a common human nature. And after the fall, we all know it's a fallen human nature. We all share a common human need. This unity of humanity teaches us that we all share a common human need. And Romans 3:23 reminds us, for all have sinned. And in the context, speaking Jews and Gentiles, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So we all share a common human need. The unity of humanity also teaches us that the gospel is the message for all humans of all nations. This gospel message is for all humanity of all nations. Matthew 28:16-20. We know in that passage as the Great Commission. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations. Hammett continues saying, it is also reflected in the fact that each human has more in common, genetically, physically, emotionally, spiritually, with a human most different from him than he has with any creature of any other species. This is why Adam found no suitable helper among all the other creatures God had made. So, this is the teaching of the unity of humanity. In summary, the unity of humanity teaches us that there were only two people in the beginning, Adam and Eve. They were both very good and made in the image of God. However, they rebelled and sinned against their Creator. The Bible teaches us that all humanity comes from Adam and Eve, and therefore we are all one race, one blood. Since we are descendants of Adam and Eve, we all are fallen and in need of salvation. God sent Jesus to deliver us from death, sin, and Satan. Through Jesus Christ's sacrifice on the cross, we can be reconciled to God. So we go back to the question. How do we come from? Where do we come from? We were created by God. Why are we here? I'm here to live for Him. I'm here to love Him. Where am I going? I'm going to the consummation when Christ returns. Who am I? In Christ, I'm a child of God, loved, accepted, and able to please Him by the power of His Holy Spirit. God bless you. Thank you.
All right. You can cut that. Yeah, you can cut that off. Want to encourage you. The video after this one, which is one we'll look at in 2 weeks, Lord willing, we'll look at in 2 weeks. It's a little bit longer video, but it kind of talks a little bit about evolution and adaptation and what's the difference between those. It's a different speaker, but it's a really good video. So I'm looking forward to that when I watched it again this week in just kind of preparation and studying and planning. But So let's look at your notes. So Adam and Eve. What do we know about Adam and Eve? Well, Adam and Eve, they believed a lie, right? They believed the lie of Satan. They trusted in their own understanding. Ultimately, they rebelled against God. They rebelled against God's authority. And that is our sin nature, to rebel against God. We know that in the beginning that Adam and Eve had harmony with God, right? Not only did they have harmony with God, but they had harmony with what? With each other, right? All of the world had harmony with one another, right? There were no carnivores, right? They were all vegetarians there. But because of sin, now they are separated from God. Now they are physically dying. Now the world has been brought into chaos because of sin. People kill each other, right? And harm one another, right? And then we look at Cain and Abel's, not Cain and Abel's, Adam and Eve's children, right? Their first two children, right? They had more children after Cain and Abel, right? But they had two children, Cain and Abel, right? Anybody ever heard that phrase or said that statement? Am I my brother's keeper? Right? Parents say, hey, where's your brother at? Am I my brother's keeper? You ever thought about where that came from? Huh? Genesis 1:9, Cain killed Abel, and then God came to Cain and said, where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? Wow. You know what I mean? Probably shouldn't have said that when my mom asked me where my brother was, right? Kind of takes on a whole nother perspective there, right? The Bible tells us that Cain worked in the fields and Abel was a shepherd of the flocks, right? And God said He wanted a sacrifice, right? And they knew what that sacrifice involved. Abel brought one of the flock, right? And Cain said, well, I'll just offer some of the fruits and vegetables out of the field. But that wasn't what God desired. That wasn't what God required. Cain was unwilling to honor God and offer God the sacrifice that he expected, while Abel chose to honor God and give God what God expected and what God deserved. So Cain got mad because his sacrifice was rejected and decides he's going to kill his brother, right? And try to cover it up. I've been watching this Western series there on Prime, and they got the gunfights and the shootouts, you know what I mean? And I bet you that's where Cain got this idea to kill his brother, right? He watched a movie with a shootout in it, right? Gunfight or something. He said, you know what, I can do that with a rock, right? Huh? Is that where he got the idea from? Where did he get the idea from? From within him, right? It's his sin nature, right? Didn't have to teach Cain to kill no more than I have to teach my children to steal cookies and lie about it, right? Comes natural to our sin nature. Adam and Eve sinned, and we saw that sin rear its head again in Cain and Abel, and the fact that Cain killed his brother. That sin that started with Adam and Eve continued to spread, right? Continued to expand. We look at the flood, and I'm supposed to be allowing you guys to give answers, ain't I? I'm not supposed to be standing up here talking. But the evil nature of humanity continued to spread. And God said what? What did God say? What did He say? I'm going to give you a chance to talk now. So I'm going to start over, right? So I'm going to start over. He looked at the world and how it was rampant with sin. And God said, I'm going to start over. You got to understand that wickedness and evil has to be punished, right? For God to be a just God, wickedness has to be punished. But God is also gracious, even in His judgment, in the fact that He chose to spare Noah and his family there. He chose Noah to build the ark, right, where him and his family could be saved. God has to judge sin. God is a judger of sin. He's a judger of wickedness and evil, but God still is gracious, right? Because of our sin, Our punishment is eternity in the lake of fire, right? That's our punishment. That's our judgment. That's what we deserve, right? I used to say a lot of times what I heard, well, somebody told me that Dave Ramsey said, right? That idea of, how you doing? Well, I'm better than I deserve, right? I said that for a long time, and then somebody told me Dave Ramsey said it. So I guess I may have got it from him. I don't know. But I was at a checkout one day, and a girl, she asked me, she said, well, how are you doing? I said, I'm better than I deserve, right? Because that's what I say a lot. And she goes, oh, don't be like that, And I told her, I said, well, I deserve the lake of fire. I deserve judgment because of my sin, right? Open door to share the gospel right there, right? That's what we all deserved, right? But God chose to send His Son. If God chose, and there's discussions, and we'll get into them one day about predestination and election, and about people that, in other countries and the Amazons that have never heard the gospel. We have all those questions. How is God going to judge them? And if God never sent His Son to die on the cross for our sins, we would all get exactly what we deserve, right? Because of our sin. But God in His graciousness chose to send His Son, right? So we see Adam and Eve's sin. I think in the series they refer to that as a sin cycle, right? You see Adam and Eve and their sin. Then you see Cain and Abel, and Cain's sin, the murder of his brother. Then you see sin running rampant before the flood, and God chose to judge them, but then delivered Noah's family. You would have think they would have learned, right? And I'm surprised. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, we're in chapter 4 of the Bible. I don't know how long. Of course, Adam and Eve had to have had, Cain and Abel. They had to be. I don't know how old Cain and Abel were. I don't know that there's an answer to that. But we're in chapter 4 of Genesis, and there's already a murder, right? This does not bid well for society, okay, for culture, right? But then you would think by the Tower of Babel, chapter 11, you would have think that people would have figured things out by now, right? It says that they came into the plain there, right? What did God tell them to do? What did God tell them to do? What did God tell Noah and his family and his descendants to do when they got off that ark? What did He tell them to do? Be fruitful and multiply, right? Spread out, right? But somewhere between the flood and Genesis 11, there's a group of people there, right? And they said, hey, let's come together, right, and build this tower to the heavens, right? And they wanted to do that to honor God, right? Is that what it says? Why did they want to do that? Make themselves famous. Make a name for ourselves, right? What does that sound like? Sounds like pride. Sounds like sin, right? You say, what's wrong with building a tower?
For their own glory.
It's for their own glory, that's right. The motivation of their heart, right, is to glorify self, right? They sought to control their own destiny. We will make a great name for ourselves. God said, be fruitful and populate the earth. But they didn't want to glorify God. They wanted to glorify themselves. So God put a stop to their plans, right? Confused their languages so they couldn't work together anymore to accomplish what they wanted to do. God said, you don't want to listen to me. I'm going to make it so you've got to listen to me, right? They're going to talk a little bit about that in the next video that we look at, right? He talked about at the end there, he talked about God's graciousness and the promise in Genesis 3 that a descendant of Eve, or Adam, would crush Satan, right? Talking about Jesus. So we saw that we have a common ancestor in Adam. We are all created in the image of God, and tonight we add to the fact that we all have a sin nature, and it comes from within us. It comes from within us. It is our sin nature. But as he mentioned there towards the end, right? The gospel, right? Matthew 28, right? The gospel is for who? All people, all nations, right? The gospel is for all people. We have a common ancestor. We have a common creator. We have a common sin nature. And we have a common Savior. I think that's about it. I think that's where we're going to stop for tonight. The Lord will, and the plan will be like next week. We'll look at these verses. We'll read them together. We'll discuss them. And hopefully you'll come with some answers. If not, it's not required homework. It's optional homework. And then we'll end with some application questions again next week. So does anybody have any questions or comments tonight before we move into our prayer time?
Genesis
Yes.
chapter 6,
Yes.
verse 7 says, "The Lord said, I will blot out man, I will erase man, whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them." So his intent at that point was to erase them. Then verse 8, "But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." Did God change his mind?
I think God can change his mind, but I don't think God ever has those sort of aha moments. You know what I mean? Well, this is better. This is a better idea. I think I should rethink this. I don't think God having a better idea later down the road is possible. What do you?
It's just one of those things. It's like, if God changed his mind, he knew he was going to change his mind because he already knew. And you get in that circle of where we can't understand, and maybe it's not even expressible in some words.
Yeah. There's other
It
passages.
kind of ties in with predestination.
Yeah, and there's other. I'm trying to think of the other example where God was it Moses? Yeah, and the Ten Commandments. Yeah, and God chose not to. You know, I think it's, and like you said, God is omniscient, so He knows what He's going to do. You know what I mean? He's got everything planned out. But I don't. You know, it's not like I said. For God, I guess to look at Scripture, I mean, I guess we could say that God changes His mind, but He doesn't. He chooses to go in a different direction, but He doesn't. Does He know He's going to do it? Certainly He does. So in that sense, He does not change His mind. He chooses to go in a different direction, but at the same time, it's never better. It's not a better plan. God can't come up with a better plan. All His plans are the best ones. So maybe a little bit difficult to understand. Maybe it's one of those things we may not ever understand. And certainly predestination, and I don't want to dive into that tonight, but certainly predestination, we don't understand that either. We don't understand the fact between, God says that He chose us before the foundation of the world, and yet, He tells everyone to call out to Him in repentance. That the fact that we have a choice, but that God chose us. And I guess we're going to get into it a little bit. My simple understanding of that is, I don't think God, I used to think, well, God looked down in time and saw who would chose Him, so those are who He chose. Well, that's not biblical. Both those things are clear in the Bible and taught in the Bible. God chose us before the foundation of the world, but God calls us to call out to Him, right? To choose to accept Him. So both those things are true. How do we reconcile both those things in our mind? I don't think it's up to us to do that. We just have to accept them both as being true because they're both taught in the Bible. But, the moment of my conversion, both those things cross paths in my life. You know what I mean? But I can't reason them together. That's right. Lily's got the answer. Anybody else? Any other thoughts?
In the video, and I might misunderstood it, but Did they say something about God's Eve's son? Or
Did what
were
now?
they talking about, or were they,
What'd you say?
something about God being Eve's son?
Jesus was a descendant. Yeah, Jesus was a descendant because we were all descendants. Mary would have been descendant.
That's what I was thinking they were going, but it just kind of threw me off.
Genesis 3:15.
Yeah, Jesus was the son of, the descendant of David. You know what I mean, of that line. So he would have been married. Yeah, yeah. And that was also prophecy that we'd be talking about as well. But yeah, so in that sense, he was. Anybody else?
They were talking about that being the first type of gospel presented in the Bible, of saying that this is what's going to happen.
Oh, you're talking about
Your
the Genesis
descendants
passage.
are going to get hurt, or your offspring, Eve's offspring are going to get hurt, but then also is going to crush Satan's head. Talking about, eventually talking about Jesus. Amen. Praise God.
So we see the gospel, the plan of salvation back in Genesis, right?
The first time. One.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else? If you have not been to the Ark and Answers in the Creation Museum, I encourage you to go there. I think Mackie, y'all said y'all were going to try to go this summer, right? Yeah, I'd like to see us maybe put a trip together for our church. I don't know what that would look like, but we may have a meeting where we say, who would be interested in going? And then we kind of look and see what the possibility of that would be. Because if you haven't been, it's an awesome experience. Like I said, we've been twice, and I would go again in a heartbeat. So
Chris McAllister has a very strong desire to get a church group to go, so he may hear me.
we loaded up 30 teenagers and took them down there and stuck them in hotel rooms, and nobody got kicked out. Certainly, we could take some church people down there, some adults maybe, without getting kicked out. So, yeah. I had one of my students. We were actually going through this study. I think we were going through this study, and she came up to me and she goes, "Hey, Pastor Dave, did you know that dragons are in the Bible?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And we went into the Creation Museum. She went with us. I said, "They had a whole walkway dedicated to dragons in the Bible." You kidding me? No. It was there.
And
Julian.
They put those together with dinosaurs
Yeah.
and explained the whole thing. It just makes so much sense.
We've got some materials and stuff from Answers in Genesis other than this study that me and Maddie required. So if you want to look at some of that stuff, we got some of that stuff. But it'd be a great trip for us to go on if we were able to do it. So all right.
David, I was thinking about what Rick was saying, was come up was God, did he make a second thought and stuff? And I was thinking about, I can't remember the verse, it seems to me like somewhere he said he was going to destroy the earth, and one of the disciples or somebody said, "Well, God, if we could find 10 good men, if you bring me 10 good men, I wonder if it doesn't kind of go to this." And he says, "No, if you bring me 10, I won't do it." Well, what about if I find one?
Yeah.
That's basically what he did there. He found one good man, so he didn't destroy it.
Like Sodom and Gomorrah, who did the same thing. You had to have a certain amount for
I'm thinking, is that what you're? I'm thinking that's what he's. I'm thinking that's what he's thinking about with Sodom
I
and
was trying to
Gomorrah.
run it through my mind, yes.
But even after God said that he had found grace and Noah, or he found favor in Noah, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. If you keep reading, then he says it again that and God was on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted, and God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me." He still is saying it, although he's already found favor in Noah, and he's still saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's you know what I'm saying? It's like he's
You're
still
saying things haven't. His mindset hasn't changed. Is what
That's
you're
correct.
saying.
You know, it's interesting too in the New Testament, I was just thinking about this, where Jesus will ask the disciples a question, like the feeding of the 5,000, like, go and get, what did he say? Was it to Andrew? I forget which one it was. But going, how are we going to feed them? Lord, it'll take a full day's wage, more than that. Like,
Yeah.
he's constantly getting us involved and working through the story with us.
Yeah, he was highlighting the problem. You know what I mean? And
Right.
you know what I mean, so they could come to the conclusion that he wanted to come to, which would be impossible for them to feed that many people. So, yeah.
impossible with us, but not
Who was possible was us, yeah, in our own efforts is what I was, that was the point that he was making there. Oh man, Andrew, Simon, Peter, I can't. Anyway, all right. We just come through that in Gospel in John sometime. Anybody else? Anybody else? So do your homework if you find time. But jot down some answers, and I'll jot down some answers, and we will go through these verses together next Wednesday. So we'll be on next Wednesday. So, all right, we'll move into our prayer time now. Any special